Good morning. My name's Keith Britzenhofe. I'm a group program manager. That's an engineering role in Microsoft, and I'm responsible for Azure Active Directory Identity Access Management, basically the premium services associated with that. I'm also responsible for Azure AD Connect, which is the connection with on-prem, and also our cloud authentication, right? So bringing in a lot of different kind of background to the talk today. And the talk today is about basically taking the next step from a hybrid organization on the cloud journey. So I'd like to start with that, with really talking about like where our customers are in terms of their current stage. Like I have a little slider across the bottom. Think of that as the cloud journey, and many of our enterprise customers at the point where they've begun to extend AD to Azure AD to take advantage of the cloud for, say, like a software as a service application like O365 or maybe Salesforce or a ServiceNow. The main authentication format for that continues to be federation, right? So you're basically using a federated authentication for single sign-on to the cloud apps. At the same time, you see the arrow across the top, our customers using the same federation farms to enable access to hundreds of other software as a service applications separate from the one that they've started here through Azure Active Directory. So I really think of this as basically they've begun the journey, and this would be called the first step, right? And why do we even recommend that you move to the next step, right? And the goal there really is to start to take advantage of the value of the cloud, if you will. And I think probably of all these, agility is one of the key ones. There's a gentleman from Aetna who gave a talk about business transformation, digital business transformation yesterday, and he was talking about onboarding new services now that he's basically focused on the cloud has moved from months to weeks. It's really dramatic, the amount of changes that has effect on the organization. In addition to that, as you move to the cloud, you really gain the value of being, for your business continuity, your disaster recovery. We've had some unfortunate situations where there have been malware attacks on customers' on-premises environments that put them in a position where, in many cases, they were beginning to depend on cloud authentication and could continue business in that case. And then cloud availability, we're up all night. We're the ones who are up all night to ensure that the service is available for your users, your business partners, and your business. And then there are literally thousands of security engineers that are working across all the cloud providers. All of these are working on your behalf, right? So no single organization can assemble such a large group of engineering associated with that. So our customers are really saying, okay, let's start taking advantage of the cloud. Let's get that value. So as we look at that move from moving the dial, if you will, from the left to the right, this chart here shows, it's a percentage chart along the left-hand side there. What this chart here shows of the Microsoft customers who are configured for access for a single sign-on, the proportion that are using cloud authentication in the aquamarine and federated authentication in the red. The chart here on the right-hand side basically goes from very small, what we call the medium is up to 1,000. The large is 1,000 to 10,000, and enterprises are 10,000 and above, right? So if you look at this model, the majority of our smaller organizations have already made the move. The majority of our larger organizations have begun that journey, if you will, right? So we're really in that mode that this shift is real. And in fact, just the other day we were on a line with a customer, 45,000 users. We were kind of sitting with them as they were making the switch from the federated to the cloud authentication, and they were very happy with the result of that. So large organizations are really making this shift, right? Now, when you make that shift, you say, hey, I want to move from the federated to the cloud authentication, what are the kind of the decision points, right? Well, the first point is like, hey, I want to move from federated to cloud, right? So make that decision. And then with that decision, then you have two choices, right? You have one in which you are like looking at ensuring that you have this, that you're synchronizing the hashes of the salted passwords, right, from your on-prem to the cloud. Or in those cases where that you have other choices you would like to make, you can also through pass-through reach back into your on-premises and gain the same value of cloud auth without synchronizing the hashes of the salted password. Right. But so we have documents that are basically a longer version of this decision tree that gives you the toolkit that you can use to make that decision and go forward. But when you have done that, when you have made that move, made that decision, then you begin to gain more rapid value from the investments that you made in moving to the cloud. Like our whole design methodology in engineering for the cloud is that we do not require you to make a move to cloud authentication to gain the value, right? It's meant to be works well with, you gain certain capabilities with the federation, you gain others with the cloud authentication. But when you have made that move, the additional things that you can add become much easier. You have no more architectural changes required to be able to take advantage of doing things like make it easy to turn on multi-factor for your users. Make sure that sign-in is risk aware. Make sure that the sign-in considers the devices which are easily managed by the cloud. You just go around the circle, and each of these capabilities becomes as easy as a configuration step rather than a design, deployment, installation, and management step. So it really is that move is very leveraging because you can then build on that and begin to add the value through time associated with that. So the real move to hybrid is beyond the authentication piece. So I've focused on the authentication piece because that really is the next step, right? When you've done that, you've enabled the stages of agility, additional security, ensuring the governance and controls that you need are in place, right? But so starting with authentication, then the next step is your applications. Not only your cloud-based applications, but your on-premises applications as well. You begin to build them, kind of layer them behind that authentication choice you've made, ensuring then that your access controls, multi-factor authentication, starting to roll in conditional access. As soon as people put in multi-factor auth, the users oftentimes complain about being over-prompted. By setting up conditional access, you can control the number of prompts for that are not needed, but increasing the number of prompts where they are needed, and obviously bringing the security of the device into play, and then start layering governance on top of that. Because now what you've done, you standardize and systematize your organization through this move, and based on that, then you get common monitoring, reporting, alerting, and against that, being able to then do the governance and get that visibility that you need. So we've worked with literally thousands and thousands and thousands of customers on this journey. Literally thousands and thousands. And as we've done that, these patterns emerge, right? The patterns emerge about what is that roadmap? Say the roadmap of what are the steps these IT departments have made on a global basis as they've been coming through this path, through this journey that we've just talked about. First of all, they're enabling cloud authentication. This is something you can add in later, or you can add in right at the beginning, right? So what we're trying to do is make sure that we can get in front of people, our customers, and get the information that they need when they're making this choice. But as they make that choice, the next thing they do is they turn on self-service password reset. It's such a win for the organization, reduces costs, but even more important than that, it gets help desk out of the middle of the password game, right? And help desk they're helping people, right? But because of that, they're basically easily socially engineered for hijacking passwords, right? So getting self-service in place, beginning to integrate the SaaS apps like O365, Salesforce, Google Apps, Amazon Web Services. And then as soon as you do that, then as the users are using mail and doing their travel online, they say, oh, I have to get to my timesheet app, or I have to get to my business partner app, which is still on-prem. So the customers turn on application proxy to give that access back to on-prem. Then as soon as they've done that, now they're exposing content from on-prem to the cloud, and many folks such as myself have a rule, say, hey, that needs to have multi-factor auth on it. Turning on multi-factor auth comes next. Then they start to wow, I've got to start managing the devices because I want the device state to be in the condition. And then when they've got that in place, they're turning on conditional access, right? Based on that, then they say, okay, now I've got the conditions, the users of the group. I want to get real-time risk associated with that, and in comes the identity protection. And at that point then, they've got basically the system is in place. They've got their SaaS apps, the one that they have targeted. And then that line at the very top that I showed you, which is SaaS apps that are associated with the Federation servers, at that point then they start to migrate them over. And I don't really think of that as a migrate. You're basically you're pointing, right? You point from the Federation server to Azure Active Directory, but then all of those apps gain the value of conditional access, multi-factor auth, the reporting, et cetera. And at that point then, people are then implementing the privileged identity management, which Steve Lieberman was just speaking about in the talk just before this, and then getting their governance in place. So basically you've got this system, this literally gets repeated, rinse and repeat, it's over and over again. But by standardizing and optimizing in this way, then people can get true governance and visibility on their applications. So I thought I'd take some real customer examples. So let's take a look at this table here. What this is showing over time. It's about this happens to be a couple years. On the left-hand side is a logarithmic scale because this particular company has over 685,000 users, right? But it's really emblematic. It shows that roadmap in terms of what actually happened, right? So they started off with their, after they set up their authentication, they started off with key software as a service applications, one of which was O365, and self-service password reset. As soon as the consultants began doing their work from Starbucks or from their customer site and that kind of thing, they said, hey, we got to get back and get our client management information, and we want to get back. So that's the app proxy line, which is the blue line, right? So people are now accessing the apps both on-prem, from on-prem, and the cloud, and they say, hey, we got to turn on multi-factor because this is our corporate strategy, and set conditions for that, for the access associated with that. At this point now, they could have done that earlier, but they woke up to the fact like, oh shoot, we should really have connected our Connect Health. We should be watching this. And then the interesting thing happened. If you watch the blue line, the blue app proxy line, it ramped up to the highest levels right there, and then it dropped down. What that is talking about is their strategy as an IT department was, we're moving to the cloud, right? Every app is a SaaS app for us. That's how we're going to go in the future. But because it takes time, they ran app proxy broadly to cover all the apps that they needed. And then by this time now when it dropped, that was when they had completed that SaaS app change, right? So really, this particular curve with app proxy we see quite a bit. And they happen to turn on PIM at this point here, right? So this is an example of a very large organization that has literally gone to the cloud, right? And this is what it looks like and the timeline that it takes. So there's another one. In this case here, it's not one of those logarithmic scales. It's an actual scale, and there's about 28,000 users in this situation. And so I remember specifically when they started here, they had a corporate policy that said, hey, applications from off the network require multi-factor auth. So they turned on the multi-factor auth, SSPR, and SaaS apps at the same time, right? And that was the way they launched. They got PIM right away because they said, oh, shoot, we really want to protect our Exchange administrators, our Azure AD administrators, our SharePoint administrators. And so you can see where they turned that on. Then they turned on conditional access and identity protection at the same time. The yellow line of identity protection says like, hey, I need to look across my whole estate. I've got to see what the leaked credentials, who are my risky users, what's going on, right? So they wanted to get that right away. And then they turned on conditional access at that same time. And then now conditional access starts taking advantage of the risk awareness of the identity protection, and they've just continued the growth, and now they're in a steady state model. So this is a really good example of that, moving to the next step, really getting over to the SaaS apps, getting over to the monitoring associated with that, and then ensuring that you're not only protecting your users with the risk-aware sign-in protection, but also your administrators with PIM. So one of the core things about IT organizations is that you're constantly dealing with budget and value proposition, and are you doing value, are you giving value to the company? In all of these kind of interactions we've had with customers, there's a couple things that the IT departments told us really worked well, right? One of the core ones was like focus on time to business value. So this is one of the things, like rather than saying, hey, I've got a 1.5 year IAM project. Now I said, I'm going to turn on a SaaS app in a couple weeks. I'm going to turn on multi-factor. I'm going to make it easier to be more secure by turning on conditional access. So really looking at the value that you gain from the organization, and then breaking the project into digestible chunks, really making it very chunky, right? So you can get something done, and then do the next thing, and do the next thing. And through this all, you get your end users and stakeholder buy-in. Like one of the things that we help our customers with, we recently made these more available. We call them deployment made easy, and they include things like, what is our recommendations for management reporting? What is the user training, right? If you want to train your users for what's a password reset, you want to train your users about how do I access applications. All this material now is there because that helps you get that buy-in, and then report on progress constantly, right? This is really one of the winning strategies that we have seen, is that the more you let your organization know how it's going, especially now that you can add value in weeks rather than months, and people can get on that train with you. So then we start from the step we've taken, right, is first of all, we begin to move the dial, right? Because we've taken the capabilities that might have been distributed throughout the organization in separate silos and separate approaches, and basically streamline them. So now you're able to not only take advantage of all the cloud, but the on-prem as well. You're doing it in very risk-aware and highly, kind of more assurance associated with the access, and you've ended up with basically the ability to slide the slider. Now, I'm not sure where you folks are on your journey, but one thing to know, we meet with our customers in depth. About 10, 12 customers come on site with us in Redmond or in London every 3 months, right? And we have deep dives with them. And I remember literally when we were talking about this 2 years ago or so, and people had their arms crossed, and they were saying, like, I'm not sure how this is going to work out, kind of thing. Last year, they were very open. They were leaning forward. This year, they were saying, like, some of the leaders were saying, like, okay, now I've got this. How can I actually get rid of Active Directory, right? They're literally trying, like, how can I take this advantage all the way? So we're getting pushed, right? We're getting pushed to identify how to do that. But this, basically the beautiful thing about this is that as you make these moves, as changes happen over time, you will gain the benefits associated with that. We have a number of aka.ms links here. the authentication method one called auth options. That's the one that we go through in depth, how you might make a choice about moving from federated authentication to cloud authentication. So I'll leave this up here, and we have 5 minutes for questions if anyone has any. We have a question back there.
Yes, you talked about the advantages of moving to cloud authentication.
Yeah.
Are there any risks or constraints that would prevent companies from moving to the cloud?
The biggest one we've seen is, so the question was, we've talked about the move and how, all the benefits. What might be the risk, or what might prevent a company from doing that? One of the things that we have found that in many cases the regulators are not up to speed on all the potential value of this and how risk is mitigated and that type of thing. So through that process, we mostly find that it's a regulatory environment. In addition to that, there are capabilities that we might still be lacking that are in, that's why you have to go through that federation paper. There might be something specifically that, or the way that a customer has used the federation servers that we cannot replicate yet, right? But that's our relentless job. Whenever we find one, we work on that. Thank you. Other questions? Yeah, in the back.
How many of your customers are getting rid of Identiverse as compared to PTA?
Well, so two things. One is our recommendation now for customers is to go cloud authentication first. So all new customers of all sizes are being recommended to go password hash sync or PTA, right? So then the second step of it, and this actually, the second step is like, oh, I've already have ADFS. Our customers are literally they're asking for that. We're actually working right now on a toolkit that will enable, think of it as a stage deployment that enable you to just do chunks at a time so that you can make sure that you feel confident about how everything is working. So at this point now, that'll probably be in this next half year, we'll have that. And at that point then you'll see a lot of customers making that move. We have another question in the back.
How do you handle user provisioning into on-premise AD or into Azure? And the second part is how you have integration between Azure and Salesforce, for example. What is that stuff?
Okay, that is a great question. So the question was user provisioning. So right now, within the cloud, we have a number of applications that we call support user provisioning, Salesforce, Concur, Dropbox, Google Apps, and others, right? And so that automatically, basically putting users into groups and assigning those groups to the roles within those applications, right? You can put those groups either in a group management system that you might have today, or you can use dynamic groups in Azure Active Directory, which you basically set an attribute like sales, marketing, engineer. Based on that attribute, you will get automatically into the group and then automatically into the applications. Including that, in terms of access to Azure AD, for provisioning into AD and Azure AD, we also do what we call inbound provisioning, and right now we have Workday associated with that. So Workday, basically by setting your parameters in Workday about your employees and your contractors, that kind of thing, those automatically populate AD and Azure AD and then flow into Salesforce or Dropbox or O365. So it's built into the system for user provisioning. And one of the benefits, if you will, because then you add one more app, the provisioning just works, right? Which is a more costly thing in a federated environment. More questions? Yes.
Can you tell us anything about when that's going to happen?
So first of all, yes. No, and so what I'm saying yes is it's really that's one of the cases right now that we're trying to relieve our customers of any requirement to have any on-prem software. MFA server has a specific things like pin mode and others that our customers are requiring. So that we're in deep work right now on that type of thing. I think our target is to begin in the next half year. It's taking much longer than we ever thought it would, but it definitely is something that watch our blogs to be able to to see as that comes in. But that's going to be one of the things that's going to be the ability to move users incrementally from ADFS to CloudAuth, and the moving people from Azure MFA, from MFA Server to Azure MFA. That work items will really expedite this outcome. More questions? Well, that is the time. I really appreciate your time today. Really, thanks a lot.